So I'm at Chapman University. There is my email address. If anybody would like to email me, just write that down, mskousen@chapman.edu. I love to correspond with people who have heard my lecture and have questions and so forth. So let's get started. We're talking about Adam Smith. Just by a show of hands, how many have never heard of Adam Smith? Be honest. How many? Are there anyone here? There are some people, so I want to talk a little bit about this. But let's start off by noting what others have said about Adam Smith, which is really quite remarkable. So many of you may have heard of Karl Marx, and you have heard of John Maynard Keynes, perhaps, but Adam Smith is one that everyone should know about as the founder of economics. So Wesley Mitchell, who is a Columbia professor, said Adam Smith did for economics in many ways what Charles Darwin did for biology, a new framework. So does that suggest we need to study Adam Smith? Indeed it does. And Jerry Mueller at Catholic University said, "The Wealth of Nations is the most important book ever written about capitalism and its moral ramifications. It was intent to make men better, not just better off." So I like that quote a lot. And then George Stigler of Chicago fame said, "Adam Smith has one overwhelming important triumph. He put in the center of economics the systematic analysis of the behavior of individuals pursuing their own self-interest under conditions of competition." And finally, Jean-Baptiste Say, the great French economist, said, "When we read this work, The Wealth of Nations, we feel that previous to Smith, there was no such thing as political economy." So those are really some great quotes to introduce Adam Smith. So who was Adam Smith? As you can see from this chart, born and raised and lived in the 18th century from 1723. So what are we celebrating? The 300th anniversary of whose birth? Adam Smith. And that's one reason we're starting the conference off with a discussion of Adam Smith. He would be 300 years old today. And so he was a Scottish philosopher of the Scottish Enlightenment. One of the key figures of the Scottish Enlightenment. And he was a professor, longtime professor at Glasgow University. I was at Glasgow University this summer for the celebration of Adam Smith's 300th birthday. And it was really amazing to discover that, I didn't know this, but Adam Smith was apparently an egalitarian and social democrat, according to the new interpretation of the Adam Smith. But he's also famous for two really important books: The Theory of Moral Sentiments, which came out in 1759, and The Wealth of Nations, 1776, which is a big, fat book, came out in 2 volumes on March 9th, 1776. And it was a declaration of economic independence, because notice the year it came out, the same year of the Declaration of Political Independence, a much smaller document, but of equal importance, by Thomas Jefferson. So that's just a little bit of a background of Adam Smith. He never did marry, by the way. He was a confirmed bachelor all of his life, no children, but has a major legacy in his work. So what can we learn about Adam Smith? Now, this is kind of heavy. I don't know how well, I guess you can read all this. So Adam Smith, it can be labeled, in my opinion, a multifaceted genius for making the case for specialization and division of labor as the key to economic growth and productivity, for his devastating critique of protectionism and advancing globalization and free trade, the counterproductive unintended consequences of centralized planning under the mercantilist model, and for popularizing the term the invisible hand to describe the market economy. So here's a quote from Benjamin Friedman. Benjamin Friedman is the other Friedman. Many of you may have heard of Milton Friedman at University of Chicago. Raise of hands, how many have heard of Milton Friedman? Okay, most of you. How many have not heard of Milton Friedman? Same people for the Adam Smith? I don't know. Economists aren't as famous, obviously, as a lot of the politicians that we deal with today. But the other Friedman is Benjamin Friedman. He says something very interesting in a recent book. He said here there's a challenge here that's really important. What was Adam Smith trying to discover? So what he was trying to discover is something that has really perplexed a lot of philosophers over the ages. He undertook a bold and controversial course of action. He sought to find a way to transform the vice of private selfishness into a public virtue. In doing so, building an economic model that could revolutionize human action, one that made people better, not just better off. And of course, he relied on other experts over the years, other philosophers, but he's the first one who really put it together. And so here is the Adam Smith challenge. Okay, here's the Adam Smith challenge that all of you would probably wonder about, one that I have. In other words, in Adam Smith's day, giving political democracy and economic freedom of choice was thought to be dangerous and could easily lead to chaos, anarchy, and even violence. Hadn't such laissez-faire policies in the past led to social unrest, forcing the monarchy to impose order and the rule of law? So that's where this quote from Benjamin Friedman comes into place. There was no presumption that peoples pursuing their own self-interest would have any more broadly beneficial consequences. Quite the contrary, so much so that acting purely on one's individual self-interest taken as a vice. And the standard adjective to such behavior was vicious. Before then, the mercantilists of the 17th century had likewise been skeptical that individually motivated behavior could make a nation better off. Their approach was to run economic affairs from top down. So that should give you an indication of the huge challenge that Adam Smith had. How is it possible that we could see individual self-interest lead to the public benefit? So according to Adam Smith, humans could be honest, hardworking, fair in their commercial activities, but at the same time, they could be selfish, greedy, lustful, and engage in frauds and deception in business that we've all seen, and take advantage of government privilege to promote monopoly power, corruption, and waste. So, in fact, most people, you're familiar with the invisible hand doctrine that the pursuit of self-interest should lead to public benefit. But he actually, in the end of book 1 of The Wealth of Nations, he excoriates the traders who engage in, here's what he says, that he said, the interest of the dealers, the traders, in any particular trade or manufacturer is always in some aspects opposite that of the public. So to widen the market and to narrow the competition is always the interest of the dealers. And this order of men have generally an interest to deceive and even oppress the public. So you can see this is a very tall order on behalf of Adam Smith to try to make this great achievement. So how does one reconcile these statements from Adam Smith and the invisible hand doctrine that by pursuing one's own interest, he frequently promotes that of society? So how is it possible to develop an economic model that could encourage the positive virtues of thrift, industry, prudence, and benevolence, looking out for the other man or woman, and at the same time diminish the selfish passions of greeds and fraud? So how did he do this? So in the next slide, he got his inspiration from Sir Isaac Newton, which is true for many of the philosophers in the Scottish Enlightenment in particular back in the 18th century. So Sir Isaac Newton, here's a statement from Norris Hetherington, who is an historian. He says, Adam Smith's effort to discover the general laws of economics were directly inspired and shaped by the example of Newton's success in discovering the natural laws. Of course, for those of you who are in physics, if we have any physics majors here or in the past, you know that Newton's laws of motions explained an orderly and harmonious universe. Based on the three laws of motion, Newton could propose such universal laws as gravitational pull is inversely proportional to the square of the object distant from the Earth. So he came through with these great breakthroughs in these laws of motion. By the same token, Adam Smith was inspired to create Newtonian economics, where the economy, like Newton's universe, was orderly and self-regulating after observing some simple rules of human behavior. You can see this in The Wealth of Nations with, now this supply and demand graph, which all of our students know about. It wasn't in Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, didn't show up until 100 years later with Alfred Marshall. But I show it here, the supply and demand curve, where you can see why there's a tendency toward equilibrium. But notice the statement that Adam Smith makes in Book 1 of the Wealth of Nations, where he says, where the quantity brought to market is just sufficient to supply the effectual demand and no more, the market price naturally comes to the central price, to which prices of all commodities are continually gravitating. Can you feel the Newtonian aspect? Gravitating, central, equilibrium model. It's very much imitating Newtonian economics. So how did he achieve this great success? What was the secret to Smith's system to allow a free market commercial society to function successfully, to benefit all, and be stable? And what's interesting is I actually discovered that Adam Smith has one paragraph, heck, it's one sentence in The Wealth of Nations, one sentence where he describes his discovery. But guess what? It's on page 561. You have to go through 561 pages to come to this solution that Adam Smith has on how to create an economic system that encourages, gives incentives for us to have a higher standard of living, and yet minimize the frauds and deceptions and the selfishness and greed that is part of human nature. How can you do this? So here it is. This is found on page, is that 561, right? 651. You even have to go 100 pages more. The book is only 900 pages. You have to go through 2/3 of this book. If anyone in this room read The Wealth of Nations, wow, we should give special credit to every one of them. It's a tough book. Abel and Gary, you didn't raise your hand? Not the whole thing. Not the whole thing. I have actually read it cover to cover, so that's why I'm here and you're there. Okay, so let's see if you can find, I've made it easy, the words are italicized. Okay, so here's the quote, and says, every man, as long as he does not violate the laws of justice, is left perfectly free to pursue his own interests in his own way and to bring both his industry and capital into competition with those of any other man or order of men. So, what are the three elements of Adam Smith's model where he solves this great issue that has been bothering economists for years and philosophers? You've got to have a system of justice. You have to have maximum freedom, and you have to have a robust model of competition. And if you have that, you will achieve this tremendous goal, this tremendous benefit. And what are the benefits? This is an amazing thing. Adam Smith promised 3 things if we adopt his model.